And it looks like everyone's here. I'm sure more people will be joining, but I'll just get started with a little welcome. This is the third in our back to school series and much anticipated IEP session. If you missed either of the previous two sessions, they are available on our YouTube channel. And sorry, I just have to admit people as they come here, so I may get distracted. I just want to introduce myself before we start. My name is Julie, and I am the events coordinator at Autism Canada. I'm going to be moderating this evening. I am by no means an expert in this subject, but the other faces that you can see on your screen certainly are. Just a reminder that we do record these sessions so that they can be shared after this evening. Only the panel will be visible on the recording, so you need not worry about that. We just do that for privacy reasons. And sorry, my notes just fell. As well, we're just going to ask you to stay on mute, and when the time comes to ask questions, we will ask you to unmute yourself. So those are just a couple of housekeeping items. And now I'm going to introduce the panel. So maybe panel, can you give a little wave when I call your name so that people know who is who? I'm going to start with Kara Dymond. Kara is a teacher and a teacher instructor, and she's also an autism consultant to a large Canadian school board. And Kara has also recently been diagnosed autistic, and so can share many perspectives on this process. Bruce Petherick is proudly autistic and is an autistic advocate. He's also a secondary school teacher and a parent. Again, many perspectives. Beside Bruce is Skye Allison-Petherick, and they are a neurodiverse high school student and self-advocate who has been through the process and can offer the student's perspective on the IEP process, which obviously is super important, especially for kids in high school. And then finally, we have, who did I not introduce yet? Dominique. Dominique Paiement, whom some of you may know, is the Family Support Manager at Autism Canada. She is well-versed in the IEP process across the country, and she also has two children on the spectrum, so she has gone through the process as well. So that is the panel for this evening. And this is a really hot topic. So we're not going to mess around. We're just going to jump right into it because we want to use our time as best we can. So I'm going to start with a couple of questions for the panel. We're going to talk through some things, and then we will open it up for questions. If you have a question before we get there, please feel free to put it in the chat. I'll be watching that, and we'll get to your question as quickly as we can. Okay, everyone ready? So let's just start with what is an IEP or an IPP in the case of Alberta? What are they used for, and who are they used by? Who wants to start off for me?
All right, I can tackle this one. An IEP, an individualized education plan, is used for usually students identified with an exceptionality, but not always. There can be students who have specific learning needs who have an IEP without an identification, but it's a document that essentially is a snapshot of the child's or youth's strengths and needs, the classroom accommodations that are specifically used for that child, and any learning accommodations or modifications to subject strands or alternative skills. So snapshot of where they are now and where they will likely be by the end of the term or end of the year if everyone is working on the same goals in the same way.
Okay, great. So in terms of their use, who within the school would use it? Just the teacher, or would there be more people using it?
Well, it's a document that's supposed to be developed in consultation with parents. So really, it's a document to keep everyone's eye on the prize. So the general classroom teacher, if there's a special education teacher, in my case, I teach an alternative program. So I am like an alternative special education teacher. So I have sections of the IEP that I complete for my students. But the document would be shared by all of the students' teachers, ideally.
Thank you.
Officially, the principal has responsibility, and that's kind of important to know kind of the official line, that the principal is responsible, and so it's up to them to share that with everybody that's needed. And in my experience, certainly at the high school level, that's every teacher. And of course, somebody that Kara didn't specifically say, but the student.
Right.
That it's an equal, the teachers see it, but also the student, and of course the parents see it as well. And that's the shared partnership of it.
Sorry guys, I did jump ahead a little bit, and Karen, thank you very much for bringing this up. Karen has just asked, and I think this is important, that we acknowledge that we're meeting on traditional and treaty territory of Indigenous peoples. I don't have our land acknowledgement in front of me. I'm sorry. I wanted to jump right in and get to the topic at hand. So apologies for not having done that. Bruce, would you like to read yours?
I'm always really happy to read it if
please. Yeah.
And please, I'm saying this from the lands, Treaty 7 lands in Alberta. That's because that's where we're here. That's where we are. So in the spirit of reconciliation, we acknowledge that we work, live, and play in the traditional territories of the Blackfoot Confederacy, the Siksika, the Kainai, the Piikani, the Tsuut'ina, and the Métis Nations Region 3, and all peoples who make their homes in the Treaty 7 region of Southern Alberta. We are all treaty people.
Thank you. Sorry about that, Karen. Thank you for bringing that up. That is very important. And we should have acknowledged that. Okay, so we know what it is now. We know what it's used for. I liked your analogy. Keep your eye on the prize, Kara. I thought that was a really good way of explaining it. Does a student have to qualify, or are there certain requirements they need, or is it just something you can go into the school and ask for?
So in most cases, they do need to have been identified with an exceptionality and gone through the identification, placement, and review committee first meeting, where that identification is accepted by the school board. So let's say a parent gets a private diagnosis, that all of that paperwork needs to be forwarded to the school. It then needs to be reviewed by the school board psychologists. And then that IPRC meeting, the first one, the identification meeting, is just sort of the official stamp that in the school board, we now know that this child has autism, or whatever the exceptionality is. But there are cases where if a child's is not learning at grade level, if they appear to be several years behind, the school may have an informal IEP. And this also applies to learners with ADHD, because ADHD is not a recognized exceptionality. So there's often an informal IEP in Ontario for children with ADHD.
So that's interesting. For Alberta, for BC, and I'm pretty sure with Quebec, there is quite a substantial amount of learning differences that are accepted. And also we'll also need to remember this includes gifted students as well, which always confuses me in a way that they're rolled in together, because it's completely different teaching strategies. However, yeah, so Skye and my son Corbin both have ADHD, both have been diagnosed, and both have official IEPs. But again, I can only speak to the Alberta experience mainly, and I have done a lot of research in the other provinces. But as Kara said also, schools have a magic way of making things happen when it's necessary, when the pushes are done in the correct way. Because no teacher that wants a student that's struggling that could do with help. No teacher wants to not give them that help.
Right. Dominique, do you know about if there's any differences in any of the other provinces besides Ontario and Alberta?
I am aware that there are different criteria as it relates to IEPs, but as Kara mentioned, some are more, obvious, where the student may be struggling in certain areas, and whether or not they have a diagnosis. And I know that in Ontario, as well as in Quebec, They can do an individualized learning plan. But at the same token, the families or the parents, caregivers are encouraged to get something in writing, to get an assessment, to go ahead and move forward in the process in order to make it an official IEP or IPP so they can carry it out through post-secondary. Some school boards have different tactics. There's a huge lack of consistency. And I think our goal as a team is to create a bit, create awareness and more consistency within the school boards.
Right, thank you. So what I'm hearing is that generally, if the family has if there's a diagnosis or if there's a psych ed report or there's some documentation that requires an IEP, generally the family would go to the school, or does the school come to the family, or does it work both ways?
Both ways.
Yeah, however it works, right? So if you feel like your child needs some extra support, go to the school, don't be afraid, speak to the teacher, speak to the principal. Who is the best person to speak to? How would a parent initiate the process?
I think it's always wise and respectful to start with the classroom teacher and bring up concerns and hear their perspective about what they're seeing, because it's also important to acknowledge that what we see in the classroom can be very different than what a parent sees at home. The demands are completely different. So many of my students, for instance, they cope very well all day. Then at home, they're having meltdowns because they're not having enough breaks throughout the day. They're keeping it together. They're masking. And so that's really important for teachers to know that although it may not appear like the child is really stressed out, there are warning signs later. That means we have to put proactive things in place. So I think that communication piece between home and schools is really key. So starting with the teacher, and then you can always go up the chain, go to the principal after that, a superintendent if needed, but you don't want to escalate things too quickly.
Right, okay. We talked about this, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, it's important that it really is a both-way situation, and Kara's point is exactly right, that very often, I mean, as she's talked to me often, her students tend to crash at home. But it's also great is if your kid is crashing at home, you should be telling the teacher, because they may not see that.
Right.
And that's important. And it's certainly, I mean, actually, funnily enough, that's where we started. We were finding some struggles at home and realized that it needed to be mediated at school as well.
So I guess then once you have an IEP in place, the one of the keys to it is to continue the conversation and to make sure you're following up, checking in, sharing information.
Make sure as a parent you understand what the document entails, what it is saying, what your child is entitled to, and make sure your child knows, because your child can hopefully learn or begin to self-advocate for the things that are in their IEP, because those are legal requirements.
Well, so, I was just going to jump in and say that it was almost time for Skye to speak, because I think it's really important to hear from someone who, I mean, there's still so much more to talk about, but it's important to speak to someone who is in it, who is, is working on an IEP with a teacher. And so how do you communicate about it? If maybe some of your needs aren't being met, how do you communicate it as an older student?
Well, this year before school even started, I sent an email to all of my teachers explaining my perspective of my own IPP, saying like, I'm aware that you guys know about this, but here's my words and my perspective of my own IPP. And then I said my needs for the certain classes and what teachers can do to help in specific classes, because it's different for each class. But if something isn't being met, or my IPP isn't being listened to, I guess, during class, I tend to I'll usually wait until lunch, so it's not in the middle of class, but I'll go to the either the school counselor or the student aid teacher, and I'll explain what's going on, and then she'll have a conversation with said teacher and explain that they need to start listening when I point out what's on my IPP.
That's great, because it would be hard sometimes to maybe take your teacher on about things like that directly. That's a tricky relationship for sure. And although we want to think that it isn't difficult. It can be as a student, obviously, when you're dealing with an authority figure like that. And so that's a great strategy. How old were you when you started advocating for yourself and your own IEP?
I actually think it was like just recently I've started doing it myself, because
Yeah.
before it was like I needed a lot of my parents' help for this. But like, for example, the email that I had said before this year, I chose to do it all by myself and I wrote it up and then I just showed it to my mom and went, can you read this and proofread it? Because I've done this already.
That's excellent. Yeah. And you must get a lot of traction doing that yourself too. Do you find that the teachers really respect that?
Well, a majority of them do. There's a couple that are still learning about it and getting used to it. So
Great.
One of Skye's goals last year was to self advocate more. And it was funny because last year was the first time we as a family unit had an IPP. And I'm going to be using IPPs because that's the words we use here. I apologize. Please translate into whatever language and acronym. It was when we got the IPP, and it was like a goal of it was it self-reliance? I can't remember, but it was like, how do you do that with a student? It was a really interesting goal, and it's something I think we worked on a lot at home. And Skye now can, by and large, raise the problems at the first level, and there is a good support team at her school. Just to explain also, she's in a 4-year high school program. So she's been at this high school in grade 9 last year. So what's been fantastic is the support staff has continued. My wife has just said in the chat what the main goal was, because she's on the chat as well.
Their main goal was on self-advocacy, asking for what they need in the classroom to be successful and feel successful. Now,
I felt that was a little unfair for a first year. But now you are definitely standing up for yourself, and it's great, because then we as parents then get called in only when it needs to be mediated, it needs to be emphasized or something, and so Skye has great control of what's going on.
But even now, just still learning. Every time I advocate for myself to a teacher specifically, I'll usually come home and I'll have to like explain to my mom detail to detail and explain what I did, because I feel like it has to be said that I did try. So if anything goes wrong, please acknowledge that I tried.
Of course, yeah. Well, and it's a big deal, and it's something that it's going to take some time to learn, right? It's not something that you're naturally necessarily born with, and it's experience will help with that. But thank you for sharing that. I think the other angle that we need to look at here is younger kids and children or teens that are non-speaking. So in terms of a parent of a child who's younger or who is non-speaking, how do you advocate? How do you ensure that what's supposed to be happening on the IEP is actually happening? How do you explain that to your child? Because, if it's a young child, they may not even understand some of the accommodations. So how do we ensure that those things are happening and that they're getting the accommodations that they legally are entitled to?
Dom, I think this is your ball.
I'm shaking my head thinking, oh my gosh, I've been through this twice. So both my children were nonverbal. My oldest began communicating at the age of 7, and my youngest began communicating at the age of 5.5. In the interim, they were both in school, and they were both diagnosed prior to starting school. So the IEP or IPP began at the very, very beginning stages of school. And what I think is, from a parent's perspective, I'm going to go off book here, and I'm talking as a parent, to those on this chat who are teachers. What's important to communicate during these meetings with the parents is I think you need to understand the parents are nervous. And one of the reasons why parents are nervous going in is one, their child who is non-speaking isn't necessarily able to communicate to you about their day. They're not able to tell you about their day, what they did during the day. You're trusting these teachers with the notes that they're providing you, if any. And when you all, you think that everything's going well until you get to your first IEP meeting, and it's, here are his weaknesses, here are his weaknesses, so it's negative, negative, negative. I cried for each IEP until probably about 2 years ago, when my oldest started high school, and the program he was in was the perfect program for him. And it was a collaborative effort between the teachers and myself. But it's nerve-wracking going into these meetings. So when you're dealing with a non-speaking, or when you have a non-speaking child, and as a parent, you're putting all of your trust in the teachers. And when you're going into these meetings, be honest with the parents, but it's always important to provide them with positive information. Maybe even start off the conversation with a positive note, because it is such a terrible feeling for a parent to go into these. It's scary. It's super scary. So that's just my personal opinion as a parent.
Agreed. And so often we can use our students or our children's strengths on the IEP as teaching strategies, as a way of building specific skills. So I think focusing just on areas requiring some support is not the way to go. My students are speaking. They're in elementary school, but I sit down and I talk with them about what IEP goals they want to work on. So I actually have them select goals that I then put on the IEP. And I think it's really important, whether or not it's the teacher who does that and has that conversation, or the parent, someone needs to explain what is on the IEP, why the child has the IEP, and what kinds of things they can ask for, especially if it's like testing accommodations. If they have the ability to stop the clock when writing a test and take a break and then come back and the clock resumes, that's a really important strategy. And they need to know that they can have that. And although, sometimes IEPs are best intentions packaged poorly, and not every teacher will have read the IEP. It's such a busy job. You might have 15 kids in the class with an IEP. Maybe you just took over the class because the school reorganized. So I think it's important for parents or students to be able to say, oh, just a reminder, my IEP says I can have scribing when it comes to this test. So I don't think that's overstepping to send an email before a test, or whatever it is, whatever the context is, where an accommodation is needed, and give that teacher a reminder.
Especially these days, with the numbers.
Yeah.
It's also like this, the one thing that I want to reinforce over and over again is this whole process involves three parties all the time: the teachers, the parents, and the students. And though they have to, it needs to be circling all the time. To be honest, my sons come back with some. We have an IPP meeting with him next week. His teacher is not following some of the suggestions we have, and so we've had to push even today, just as a gentle reminder. But it was the teacher had sort of said, oh, Corbin hasn't done some work, and so we're going, okay, well, hang on, we need to make sure there's communication. We need to know what sort of work he's expecting to do. That communication needs to come back from us as parents, so we can help the student, Corbin, who does the best in the class, to talk to the teacher. So that cycle, it goes on. And I'm putting my huge parental hat on. You have to advocate for your child and never be frightened not to. And as Dom said, I understand it's a scary procedure, and hopefully we can answer some questions here to make people going for the first time not so scary.
Well, and I think at the end of the day, it's the best interest of your child. And I know I'm in Ontario. The size of classes in Ontario right now are huge. Teachers are overwhelmed. You're right, Kara, they do have multiple kids with IEPs in their classrooms. So, so managing that from a parent perspective is going to be important. So I guess then just listening here, I see a lot of value in having an IEP meeting with the teacher, the child, and the parents. Always have the meetings together as much as you can. How often do you review an IEP with the student as a teacher? And then how often would you do that as a parent?
Typically in Ontario, the IEP, well, it's a working document, so it technically can be updated anytime, but like the most common practice is 30 days after the year begins, and then again in term 2, 30 days after term 2. So twice a year, parents will probably receive a copy of the IEP.
Yeah.
And is it worth, sorry about that. In terms of you sitting with your students and creating goals from the IEP, do you review those goals frequently, or do you just do it the 2 times a year?
So my students pick their own goals throughout the year. So not all of those goals go on the IEP, because again, the IEP is a snapshot document. It's not everything I'm going to be teaching my students. It's just
Right.
a few key things. But with them, I select the first term goals, and then term 2 we would review. Do you want to keep working on these? Is there something else you want to put in? Because my whole goal for my students is to have them be able to identify their own needs, talk about their own needs, and self-advocate for the supports that will help them. So all the goals kind of deal with those aspects.
Right. As a parent, I would think that you'd want to remind them, if they had a test, remind them that they can, for the first little bit, remind them that they can stop the clock, or they can take a break, or, and then I guess, as you said, it's not crossing the line to send a quick email and say, just a reminder that, so-and-so is going to need to be able to stop the clock during the test.
And even better if you can coach your child and say, don't, remember to
Right,
tell.
of course. Yeah.
And then send an email to the teacher anyways and say, I've prompted Jimmy to self-advocate for this thing that he needs, but just in case, this is
Right.
what he should be asking you.
Of course. What about younger kids that aren't quite there, that aren't able to maybe create their own goals, but that do need accommodations, just making sure they're getting what they need as a parent? How do you do that? Dom? Anyone?
I'm actually going through it right now with my youngest, and it's tricky because he's a level 1 autistic, so he's and he's also ADHD, but he's aware of his surroundings, and he's trying to be just like the rest. He's trying to conform on his own, and we are trying to have these conversations with him to let him know that it's okay to take a break, and it's okay to have the rubber band around your seat so you can kick it during class, or to have your fidget. These are all part of his IEPs. The breaks, twice a day he's pulled out of class with a buddy of his choice, and they get to go and run the track outside just so he can exert his energy, so he can come back to a focused environment. But he feels like he is being singled out. He's aware that, and he's being picked on because he needs the help. So we are in the process right now of trying to, and I'm working with his teachers and trying to find a way to help him understand how important self-advocacy is, and how important it is to ask for help. And it doesn't make him a bad kid. It doesn't make him a bad student. It just means that, there are certain things that he needs to focus on. And because he, has so many other talents, his brain consumes of so many other cool things and cool talents, that little part of the brain that requires focus on academics, we need to grow that area a little bit. And we need to make sure that you have the help that you need. So it's kind of like explaining to him, well, you're super good at sports and you're super good at this stuff. Now let's make you super good at the other side, right? So, and he wants to, he's just afraid to. So with his team of teachers and his EAs, we are working on we've had to prompt him at the beginning of the school year, but now he's like, they'll come and see him. Sam, do you need a break? No, I'm okay. All right, so he's good. Sam, do you need a break after lunch? Do you need a break? Yeah, I need to run. Okay, perfect, let's go. So he'll bring a buddy and go, but it's just, they have to be on board, that you have to have that constant communication with the teachers, and they need to be on board with your methods. So
What grade, how old is Sammy?
Sammy is 9.
Okay, so that's the age. Great. Okay, there's a question here.
Maybe just before going to,
Sure.
I think it's also, this is perhaps not the greatest thing I can say to Dom, but it's a process that's going to take years.
Yeah.
And actually, you know what? I'm really happy to say this. It's a process that takes years, and that's okay. Like, you're not 100% perfect with your no. Okay, I mean, and Skye is 15, had 2 years of this. We still have to remind, we still have to prompt, and I'm going to expect to be doing that for another 3 or 4 years at least. And it's just like, that's okay, because it is a different, there is a neurological difference. We are neurodiverse, and so neurotypical people do see us as different. We need to continue breaking that down by saying everybody's different.
Mm-hmm.
And
It's normal.
it's a battle that's going to be going on for years, and I'm with you and helping you as much as I can, Dom.
Yeah, you're awesome.
I may have said this in the last one. I can't remember. I spent all summer telling teacher candidates that learning tools are for everyone. We have to throw out the notion that like fidget tools and things like that are just for those students on an IEP. We need to actually start teaching the entire class different strategies that they can advocate for themselves. I think it's really important as parents and as teachers to talk about our own unique learning needs, because everyone has them. So as a teacher, I would start out September, have one lesson that's just about, okay, what are your strengths? What are you an expert in? What fields of knowledge do you feel really confident in? And then we'd work on the flip side, and modeling as the adult. You know, sometimes my working memory isn't perfect, and I need to write notes to myself, and I need checklists, and sometimes you might need to remind me of something that I said, and writing on the board. So this is something that is harder for me, and this is something that mitigates that. And getting students to start thinking about those things, and do it with the whole class, because none of us has a full deck, right? Like, we all have things that we need as we learn. And I think starting to change the culture of classrooms will help students like your children, Dominique.
We talked a lot about self-advocacy in the last session. And so parents, if you're interested in that, please go back and take a listen. But we did talk about starting quite young and sort of the process of learning to advocate for yourself and how important that is. And you know, particularly when you get to high school, when you're Skye in high school, you don't necessarily want your mom and dad always coming in to advocate you. You'd like to be able to do some of it for yourself, I'm sure, and know that your parents are there to back you up, right? I mean, that would seem to be a reasonable goal, I would think.
You want to say what you just said to me? You whispered to me.
Oh, I said in the beginning, when like the conversation of IPPs was brought up, I didn't want an IPP. I didn't want to identify with like as a kid who had an IPP, because in like I didn't want to be called out and feel different in my class, because the teacher would always like go to the front and call up certain students and give them this like big brown envelope to bring home to their parents. I was like, well, I don't want to be that kid. I want to be called out to the class and given this big envelope, and now everyone's wondering what this kid has and why this kid needs to bring this envelope home. And so I didn't want to have the conversation of getting an IPP. I didn't want to accept the fact that I'm going to need one, because all that was in my mind was, now kids are going to mock me and make fun of me because I have this big brown envelope that I have to take home.
And how comfortable are you now?
Comfortable enough to tell the people around me.
Yeah, and but you still get teased a little bit.
But like, I just kind of brush it off, ignore it, and then when I'm home, then I talk about it.
The safe space, right? Yeah.
Just for parents to be aware, the IEP or IPP is a really important thing to have in place, to have access to resources and programs.
I was
And
going to just get to that. Yeah, I
falls
wanted to
throughout
ask a couple
the
of questions first. One was, so we've talked about parents, we've talked about teachers, we've talked about students. Is there ever a reason to bring maybe another party, a neutral party into an IPP, a psychologist or an educational therapist or anyone like that? Can parents sort of reach out beyond themselves? Because sometimes, as Dom said, these meetings can be scary, and understanding what can go in these documents, maybe they're not 100% comfortable with what they can ask for and what they can't ask for. Is that acceptable to have someone come into your meeting with you?
Yes, parents can always request an advocate or someone with them.
Okay, great. I would think that would help, particularly the first couple of times if you're learning and you're new to the process and you want to make sure you get the best bang for your buck, for lack of a better expression. So generally, Kara, you just sort of hit on what I wanted to talk about, but specifically an IEP covers accommodations and strategies for learning. Is that sort of the best definition?
And any academic modifications as well. So a modification would be, it's most common in like math or language. So if a child is 2 years below grade level or more, they'd be doing math from a previous year, or a reduction in the complexity of things being assessed or the amount being assessed. So they could still be at grade level, but it's just reducing some of that, some of the workload.
Is there a limit to the amount of stuff you can put on an IEP? I mean, I guess it's sort of you could list a million things, but what's the reasonable, I mean, I guess you want to come up with the most important, you want to prioritize some things with the student and the teacher, and then decide what the focus is going to be. Is that the best strategy?
Yeah, it's a snapshot document. Doesn't have to be everything. And like, you want to be able to accomplish it by the end of the year. So you don't want to have an IEP that has like a million sections. So I think it is about prioritizing, using ongoing assessment data to make sure that things are on track as a teacher.
Is there actually a meeting at the end of the year to review the goals and to see how the year went before you move into the next year? I mean, my son has an IEP and we've never done that. So it's just interesting.
There's usually an annual review, but sometimes it's the beginning of the year, sometimes it's the end of the year. Like, it seems to happen at different times. And often a letter goes home and one of the options is we don't need a meeting. And parents will sometimes check that without realizing what it's for. Like, I think the meetings are important to have.
Right. So it is important to go to every meeting, the end of the year meeting, talk about the goals, talk about what worked, what didn't work, all of that, I would imagine. Yeah. Dom?
So that would be, technically that would be an IPRC. And basically what that would mean is you're meeting with, and I think what's important is that not many teachers will do this, not many schools will do this, but it's such an important piece for my two kids. And it's just right before summer starts. We talk about, we meet with the teachers, we talk about all of the things that they've accomplished throughout the year. We clean up the IEP just a little bit and set the goals for September, when we also meet again at the end of October to make an official, to revise the official IEP for the remainder of the year. But the transition period. So even I saw there was a post earlier in the chat to, a son going into high school. Well, this is a huge transition. If he has an IEP, chances are you're probably going to want to communicate with this high school before they actually make their way there, and then ask the teachers to provide one, either a physical tour if that's possible, or two, some kind of transition plan, whether it's a PowerPoint, this is where your class is going to be, this is where your locker is, this is the closest washroom. So these are all like important tools that will alleviate so much anxiety over the course of the summer. And I know that's for a fact. And it's a key tool for both my kids, because I don't want to have to deal with, I don't know how to answer your question. I don't know who your teacher's going to be. I don't know. We need that concrete evidence before the end of the school year, and to make sure that, that transition is easy. So these meetings are important. Like Kara said, the more meetings you have, the better, because there's nothing wrong with communication, and there's no such thing as too much communication. If the parents need to know what's going on in the following year, it's okay to ask. And it's, you know, if the teachers are in a position where they could provide that information, great, let's make it happen.
So that brings up a good point, which is transitions between schools. In some provinces, it's grade 6 to grade 7, and then again, grade 8 to grade 9, or in some school boards, some provinces, some it's just grade 8 to grade 9. That's a great point. Going to the school, if your child's in grade 8 and is going into high school, do you connect with the high school in advance of the school year and say, my son is coming or my daughter is coming, they have an IEP, I want to make sure it's filed with you, and how can you make the transition smoother? Is that a fair request from a parent with a child that's transitioning?
Actually, technically, legislatively, the IEPs go with a student to the new school, and each school, as they move, are supposed to have a full record of the IEPs. Now, that's a legislation. It's always a good, always helpful to be a reminder,
Okay.
just to make sure that the new school. And we have learning support teachers here in Alberta for most high schools, and they're the contact points that you have for going from, in Skye's case, 8 to 9, and CBE in Calgary 9 to 10. The learning support teachers are the people that help coordinate that. And they tend to be a little more permanent than a regular teacher. They tend to stay around because they are a constant. Dom's point about the tour and all that sort of stuff, which we do talk a little bit about in the first two of these talks, just a little, that's actually got, if you don't have an IPP, that's important as well. I think for any new neurodiverse student, getting used to that new space is important.
Yeah.
And if it can be done through the IPP process, great. If not, there's another way.
So parents, just ask, advocate, ask, go for it, do whatever you need to do to make sure your child is comfortable, is what I'm hearing. And I think most of us do that, but it can be a little bit intimidating depending on who you're dealing with and where you're dealing. Okay, let's talk about things beyond the regular curriculum. So does an IEP include any programs beyond the regular curriculum, like speech language or communication or social stuff or behavioral stuff? And if it does, it's obviously written in, and how will that be delivered? And this is a specific question that was emailed in. And then there's actually a comment, sorry, I'm going on here, that says, can we request accommodations for social interactions during free time, such as recess, lunch, and after school activities?
So yes, there are what are called alternative skills sections of the IEP. So for instance, students who come to my program are not learning the academic curricula, they're learning more about understanding diagnosis and self-advocacy and social communication. So I developed sections of the IEP with goals in those areas. Now, schools can also add sections even if the student doesn't go to a separate program, but staff need to be aware and they need to be working on those skills as well. So certainly as a parent, you could request like a social skills section on the IEP. It depends, is what I'm going to say. They may or may not accommodate exactly what you want, but you can have a conversation, express your concerns. I would also just sort of caution teachers and families, like, you don't want to force socialization every recess. Students often need a break, but maybe I always find the lunch hour is such a long recess that might be a good time to have something else in place, like an anime club or helping out in the library. Now in COVID times, some of these things are harder to do. So you'll have to work with schools to see what is feasible.
But those kinds of resources are accessible and can be written into an IEP. Mm-hmm. Great.
But you also have to, there's a practicality involved in that though too.
Of course.
And that's not to say don't say anything, don't bring it up, don't request it. The school can say that, but it's also monitoring children's behavior during recess is very, very difficult. And the teacher with the greatest heart and greatest love still may miss things just because they need a break.
Yeah, they're not out there every recess. Yeah.
Not all perfect. Yeah. You know, it's a, as you said, it's a conversation, and there's lots of parties involved. There's one other question here.
Scott,
Sorry.
I want to emphasize something.
Well, I was going to say, because at my school, normally the kids have to go to the cafeteria to eat, but I actually avoided the cafeteria on the first day of school because of like how overwhelming it was for me to even think about all the social interaction I'd have to do and what table to sit at. So I actually like always eat lunch with the student help teacher now. And if she isn't there, then I go to like another trusted teacher. And so I kind of have 3 teachers I circulate with, but I'm never in the cafeteria or outside for lunch doing social stuff. It's always with teachers where I can be quiet, put both headphones in, and just disconnect while I have lunch.
Mm-hmm.
And that's an important thing to think about too when it comes to these IEPs and accommodations, I would think, is that if your child is overwhelmed by the day, because it can be overwhelming, and there's not a quiet space, then that's maybe something you want to ask for lunch hour or for recess time.
Yeah, we want to make sure all of the IEP goals respect neurodiversity and don't demand just complete compliance to neurotypical norms. I see a lot of eye contact goals that just like really upset me, because I know it can be physically painful for my students. So we have to work on, well, what does listening look like for you? And let's have a goal about that instead. Like, what is comfortable?
That's a great one. Yeah, that's a great one to put on there. Can you have an IEPP without disclosing the specific diagnosis? That is a question in the comments.
I don't legislatively in definitely BC, Alberta, and I'm pretty sure the same with Ontario. Sorry, not Ontario. No, there has to be a diagnosis, and
like every student,
there has to be. There kind of has to be a reason for it.
I mean, the school can initiate one in Ontario, but often if they are trying to get the family to get a diagnosis, they won't. Like, they will sort of let the child fall through the cracks a little bit to put pressure on so that you can get the legal document and you can get the documentation that helps inform what everyone's understanding of the child's learning needs are.
We again, trying to normalize the conditions. I understand that some people are reluctant to share that. As parents, we are trusting so much of our children to the parents that I would hope that you can trust them enough to say why you're asking for an IEP and IPP.
The teachers.
Ask the teachers, yeah. I mean, disclose to the teacher. I'm asking, you know.
It's not necessarily a public document, though, is it? It's something that's confidential between the teacher, the school, and the parents, the school, and the child, right? It's not.
Quite honestly, my job, I officially teach as a contractor in the Catholic system here, and I do not have access to students' coding information nor their IPPs and IEPs. The teachers will most often share that with me if it's important when I'm teaching, but I do not have access to those. They're secure.
Yeah. Which is interesting though, because the child would benefit from you knowing that information.
And
so that's doesn't make a lot of sense. Yeah.
I'm a special case, which is, yeah.
Can parents request and expect individual lessons or services for for a child with an IEP?
You can request, but I certainly wouldn't expect. You know, you can ask, is there anything available? Are there any programs that work on these things? Programs are far and few between. They don't have a lot of spaces. It's really like you have to be an advocate sometimes to know about what's available. So asking those questions, I think, is really important. But like, schools don't all have extra staff who we used to have systems where there were child and youth workers who would go around and do social lessons to classes, but there have been so many cuts over the last 10 years that I wouldn't say you should expect individualized lessons on alternative skills unless they're admitted into the program. But having the diagnosis, having that initial IPRC is sort of like the gateway. You might be able to access a program or a specialty teacher or a social worker coming in for a few sessions once that's in place.
Okay. Yep, Dom.
So essentially, if you have an incredible team, you are always, from parent to parent, you have the right to ask, as Kara mentioned. For example, my son, since the age of 3, has been doing physiotherapy 3 times a week. And now what they're doing in school is that we are providing the gym teacher or the EA, his support teacher, with that same plan. And there's a lot of communication between his physiotherapist and the team at school, where they're implementing those particular exercises through, whether it's gym or whether it's that one-on-one support. So you have the right to ask. Don't be afraid to ask. Say, my child is currently, in speech therapy. Is there a way that you can incorporate that into his programming? Or, don't be afraid to ask. It's always important that you put it out there. And if if the teachers can, they will do their best to accommodate.
I have 2 more questions that I really want to ask, and then I want to turn it over to the chat. Cindy, we will share contact information for everyone. I'm going to send an email tomorrow. I'm just going to answer this now so I don't lose it, but I'm going to send an email to everyone who's registered for this event tomorrow, and I will share contact information with you so that if you have questions, you can reach out. You're always welcome to reach out to us at info@autismcanada.org. Dom and her team are always there well, not always, they do sleep occasionally, but they are there answering questions all the time. So if you ever have questions, please reach out, and we can always connect with Bruce and Kara on your behalf as well. Okay, my last 2 questions, and then we'll open it up. Is there attendance flexibility with an IEP? Or can there be, or can that be written in?
There's a legal response, but I think, Kara, you have a more practical response.
I mean, even if for some reason the child is like sick most of the year, they're still entitled to that IEP, I guess. Like,
can you write attendance differences into an IEP, I guess, I think is the question, if I'm understanding it.
I would, like, if you had a child who was anxious transitioning to school, you could have a goal about like how to make them comfortable entering the school, for sure. Yeah. And they can, as someone pointed out in the chat, sometimes students do have modified days. Maybe they come for half a day in consultation with the parent, the student, the school. Yeah, you can absolutely have that.
Thank you. And thanks.
Last year, if I had like an overwhelming day and I couldn't function in my next class, I would explain to my teacher why. I would ask what I would miss during this class, and then I would go to like the learning commons or just any other empty classroom, and I would just have that. I would basically turn into a free period where I can just do whatever I want, have any devices that I want. I wasn't allowed to leave the school, but it was like I didn't have to worry about class. I didn't have to worry about interacting with others. I didn't have to worry about anything really. And if I had any homework, it'd just be emailed to me when I could do it, when I was able to function again properly enough to do the work.
Great, thank you. That's great perspective. Okay, my last question, and this is a big one right now. How in the world are teachers managing IEPs in virtual learning? You knew that was coming, didn't you, Kara?
Okay, I'm trying to be diplomatic for a moment. It is difficult because virtual teachers generally don't have access to the OSR because they're not at the home school. The OSR is the Ontario Student Record. So it would be the folder where all of the pertinent previous IEPs, any assessment data, like, is kept. So some of it's taking them a long time to get the relevant information. One thing that's happening in my board in the virtual school is the IEP is often being written by the school-based special education teacher for implementation by the virtual teacher without that much communication. Like certainly it's not working the best, I would say.
So what does a parent do in that situation? If you have a child that's learning virtually, is your best strategy to try and write the IEP with the virtual teacher?
I would say once you get that IEP, you can have input, right? You can talk to the virtual teacher and say, these are the things on the IEP. What do these things mean? Okay, I agree with all of that. That's great. I don't see anything about, I don't know, something else that your child needs. You can ask for things to be added. It may not. I would say, like, have that conversation and let the virtual teacher know things that you think are critical. Okay. They might not have had time to review it. Hopefully they will. Because yes, many teachers have like half their class on IEPs. So it takes a while to go through all of those.
Right. Okay. And for older kids, obviously advocate for yourself. Parents, advocate. Don't be afraid to reach out. Okay, those are my questions. And I feel like that covered a lot, but I am sure that there are questions from the people that are viewing. So you can either put your question in the chat, or you can put your hand up and I can unmute you and we can do questions that way. So I'm going to open it up to everyone. And if you want to add your question in the chat, feel free, or you can put your hand up and I will, or even maybe put in the chat, I have a question, and then I'll find you and unmute you because there's quite a few people on here. Any questions from I
wouldn't mind hearing somebody, just because these are three of my good friends, and it's like, oh, I'd like to hear a new voice.
I don't see any hands. I can't believe there's no questions.
There is a question in the chat. Can parents request speech language services from the school SLP teacher?
Okay.
So, I mean, you can raise your concerns to your teacher, like your classroom teacher, about, your child's speech development. Usually the process is the teacher would contact the principal, and there might be like a local school-based support meeting, or you could do the annual review and bring up, is there any way I can access speech language support? But the school would have to initiate that. So again, it's always bringing your concerns to the school.
Great, thank you. We have a question from Carrie.
Hi, thank you very much, everyone. I've loved this session. My daughter is just in JK, so just entering the public school, and she does a hybrid. So half the time she's at an ABA school, and half the time she's at a Catholic school in Toronto. And I want to know what my expectation can be for the two to work together. So she's at an ABA school working on goals of the eye contact, which you mentioned, or attaining, which kind of aren't goals that you really see in the academic setting in a JK. So I want to know how to make, her time at both places work at the same goals, really.
That's a tricky.
Sorry.
No. I think all is for kids to be in one school system. Kara, do you have any experience with this?
So certainly I know it happens. I've had parents send me goals that students are working on in other programs. And so like if goals can be accommodated or put in that are the same, that's great. So I would share what they're working on and ask if there's any way the school can do those things. And they may be able to do some of it. They may be able to do all of it. But odds are there will be some they can't do. But I would share that document and ask if there's any way these goals can also be included.
Does it ever make sense to connect the teachers?
Yes, there's paperwork that has to be filled out for exchange of information, but you certainly can, and that can be really helpful to have everyone able to communicate.
Okay, Carrie, I hope that answers your...
through that as a parent. I've gone through that as well, where both my kids were in programming with CHIO out of Ottawa, and they were the program coordinators insisted in the preliminary paperwork that they were to communicate with the teachers regularly, and sometimes even went to the school on site to see how the student is, how my child is working in a classroom setting versus the other programs. So it's it's available, it's possible. They just need to connect, and the parent can ask. Absolutely.
Carrie, does that answer your question?
Yes, it does. Thank you very much.
Great, thank you. Okay, let's see, I'm gonna mute. And there was Lisa, yes, we are recording and it will be available tomorrow or the next day on our YouTube channel. So you'll be able to access this again if you want to watch it again on our YouTube channel. I will also email you the link before the end of the week. Okay, Karen, Tim, Bruce and Kara, what are two things from an actually autistic perspective that teachers and parents should be rethinking when it comes to programming for students in order to meet the actual needs of little autistic people? And just as an aside, Karen, Bruce, Kara, I'm going to connect the three of you at some point because Karen and I have had a few emails and I want to make sure you guys all get connected.
Wow, that sounds like a webinar series and presentation group. Karen, I think Kara and I are actually working together on doing a whole bunch of presentations for schools around the country. We're in the basic stages of this, and it's trying to make all teachers at all levels be aware of neurodiversity and how it can be handled better in the classroom. We have our three little words: assume competency, ask the student. Oh, what's the third one? We have our three little things which are just valid for all cases. I don't think we don't have a point, do we? We don't have just one point that we can say. It's a whole blended system.
I mean, I think my answer to that question would be, as much as possible, involving student voice. What is it that is meaningful to them to work on if they're able to indicate that in some way? I think really thinking about what we consider to be normal and whether that is appropriate and useful and fair to expect. I think creating classrooms where our children are comfortable should be the end goal.
I hope that helps, Karen. Again, you guys will have lots of time to talk about that when I connect you. Are there any other questions at this point? I'm not seeing any hands, so we all need to presume competence, all experiences are valid, and rethink communication. Great, yep. Oh, first year in class for my son who is currently enrolled in SK. You've already mentioned not to fill up my IEP with thousands of pages. Any advice on where to start with my expectations? That's a great question.
Things that are going to increase comfort and sense of safety in the classroom for that child. Because I have seen students who've had so many goals, and then what the message that sends when we have so many goals for one child is they start to think, I'm broken, there's something about me that needs to be fixed, right? Instead of, you have one or two or three really well-targeted goals that they feel in control of and they feel capable of being able to do with a little bit of work. So I would really think, really prioritize what is going to increase your child's comfort in the classroom. So whether it's being able to take breaks. Bruce, do you have any other ideas?
Well, I was going to say, again, just to reinforce, it's the communication. Go ahead with, when you're preparing the document, maybe you have 10 goals. Then start talking to the teacher, and the teacher at the year level may have experience going, well, these sort of things are the things I think work. And then you can go, oh, that's a great idea, or no, I disagree because this is important. And I think that the communication will help. It's a difficult question for me to answer because it really depends on the individual student and the year level. Often an IEP goal could actually be at the level of for the first 6 months, they go to school, they sit in the chair and they're facing the board. I'm like, you know what? That's a wonderful, that's a goal. That's a win for a lot of students to be that comfortable to be in a classroom, paying attention, sort of, you know.
For my son, when he was young, it was getting him to school and getting him into the classroom and keeping him there for the day. You know, was keeping him, giving him the goal of being there, being as much of a participant as he could, but being there for the day because he was really school resistant. So it definitely depends, I think, on the child. But I think learning about what you do in school and how to enjoy a day at school is really important for kids that age, because you want them to have that good experience as they move forward, for sure. Dom, any thoughts on that one?
I do actually, and again, it's probably because I felt like I lived it just yesterday, but when we talk about, early intervention, and obviously this little one here enrolled in SK, so they're still little tiny people, and the parents are probably doing whatever they can to help with early intervention, which means, occupational therapy, physiotherapy, speech therapy, social development. So these are all, early intervention strategies that families who are extremely proactive focus on. So when the little one starts school, the parent has all of these hopes and dreams to be able to make sure that all of these interventions are being addressed while they're in school. And it's just not going to happen in SK. So the idea is maybe to take either a little bit of each intervention, strategy and incorporate that into a potential IEP. But essentially the idea is get them into SK, let them socialize, let them make a friend. That alone is like a huge, huge goal. And just start small and work your way into, other things. But these are questions that I've seen before from really proactive parents who really want all of these interventions addressed, in a school setting as well as at home. And it's a tall order. It's a lot to ask.
It's a marathon. It's not a sprint. Is that the
much? Yeah.
It's a great analogy. Okay, I hope that answered your question, Angela. And again, if you need any more advice, feel free to email Dom, info@autismcanada.org. Any other questions?
Yes, I have a question. May I ask a question?
Of course.
Yes, I have a son. Is in the high school level, and of course, he's in the IEP. But I don't know how to help him because he's non-verbally. He doesn't asking when he has a question. He never reach his teacher, and I always want to help him to do his homework, but he don't do any homework at home. Just playing the game every night. So right now I'm very I don't know how to help him. I reached out to his teacher, like a Canadian law teacher, and his teacher told me he has already left 3 assignments he didn't submit last week. And right now I want to help him to reading, writing, but he has no interest. But so right now I don't know in high school level, I don't know which one I can reach out right now, except like the teacher. And do you have neither homeroom teacher or anyone else in the school?
With your IEP or IPP, with who did you make the IPP with? IEP, sorry.
Yes.
Who did you do that?
With the principal.
Okay, so my contact, my first question would be the first contact point then would be the principal, perhaps asking who they think would be the best person to contact. Well, it's a.
Do you know in high school level, I know they have a special education teacher. Does this teacher I can contact them? Because when I send them the email, there's no response. Neither youth counselor, youth worker, they don't reply me. It's very ridiculous in a high school like this.
And in one respect, you then also have to acknowledge or just realize that the teacher to whom you're contacting may have 50, 100 students to respond to. So don't think that they're not. A little prompt's always good to remind them that you did contact. One of the things I found useful for actually my kids and also my students is using a visual cue to remind the teacher that the student needs some help. With Skye, we were using, what was your visual reminder? When you needed to ask a question of the teacher, what did you do?
Oh, I would put Post-it notes on my desk, like a colored Post-it note at the top corner, and then that was my teacher's cue to come and help me.
So you could use a strategy like that in consultation with the teachers, that if your child needs some help, that they may put a pen in a certain position or something. And what that's doing, it's reminding the student that they can communicate with the teacher in many different ways. It doesn't have to be a verbal communication. And also reminds the teacher to be checking in maybe a little more regularly, just to see if there's that visual marker has been made as a prompt. Again, it's the communication, but in a different style in this way. Does that help as a suggestion?
Of course, when I send the email to his teacher, the teacher always reply me within 24 hours. The teacher is very responsibility. However, my son, he doesn't submit his homework, and his teacher looks like allow him to do that. But for me, for my expression, I don't like this, because this is not the way to study, to learn knowledge, right? He still, when the teacher have like, this is assignment for this week, this is for the exam for next week, he need to participate. And he doesn't, I don't want him, he just go to school every day, but have nothing to do at home, just playing the game. This is not the correct attitude to be a high school student, right?
So maybe some tips for better engagement at school or better engagement with homework?
I think it's definitely worth
the homework, yes.
meeting. Yeah.
Sorry, what was that, Kara?
I'd ask to meet, like to have a strategy meeting with that, certainly with the teachers in question, and then bring in the student as well. Like I would maybe talk with the teachers first and then have your son there too. To see, and I don't know if your son's able to say, like, I always see it this way. If something isn't getting done, if homework isn't getting done, there's some sort of barrier. So what part of the homework is hard? Where is he getting stuck? Then it's easier to come up with strategies to put in place, to whether it's breaking down the work more, whether it's like chunking it in class, reducing homework entirely and doing more of it at school. There's so many reasons why he might be struggling, and I think you have to sort of collaboratively problem solve that.
So a meeting with the teacher to talk about some strategies about how much homework there is, etc. Fair?
Yes.
Okay.
And
okay.
Does that help?
Yes, if the teachers involved to him in personally or one-on-one, he will do it. That means he need to enforce him. Like this summer, his GLE teacher enforced him one-on-one visual reading, and he assigned him 1 week he had to finish 2 chapters or 3 chapters. And the GLE teacher posed the question to him. He need to write down, and then they read together, and then he can do. Otherwise, like the whole class, because my son right now he's in the regular class, and he always thinking if he don't finish his homework, his teacher doesn't care about. So that's why he don't do as well.
It sounds like a meeting with the teacher would be beneficial to create some goals around what homework needs to be done. Skye, did you have a question related to this?
No, I actually have like my own question.
Oh, okay. Okay. Go ahead.
So in like one of my other classes, I had a teacher ask us if we still liked getting rewards for doing something in class. So my question actually is do you think people that have IPP should be given rewards for succeeding something on their IPP? Because then like, I'm wondering if they keep getting rewards every time they do something, it's kind of becoming like an expectation that they're going to get something for doing something that is on their IPP, if that makes sense. Like, I don't know if people should get rewards or not, but I wanted other people's opinions on that because it's like they're gonna grow to expect it now. So it's like, well, I've done this, now I want a reward.
Well, let's start with
Skye.
the teacher here.
Skye, your dad has heard me rant about rewards. Okay. Again, like, I have to be diplomatic. Okay. All right. Rewards. Rewards are generally about complying and obeying to somebody else's will, which I have a fundamental problem with. And I'm moving away from that. Like, we are taught so much as teachers, reward, reward, reward. But if you take away those rewards, sometimes the behavior doesn't actually change. It was just to get that reward. I have now fundamentally shifted what I do in my class, where I get students to decide for themselves what they want. And I talk about, okay, what are you doing to take care of yourself today? What are you doing for yourself? Because that's what we do as adults. As adults, we go, okay, you know what? I had a tough day. I'm going to take a bath, or I'm going to have a glass of wine, or whatever it is. And to me, that is it nurtures metacognition, thinking about your own learning and progress. It's checking in with yourself. So to me, that's a healthier approach than giving people things for doing what I want them to do.
But we reward you a little bit.
A little bit, but it's not like every time I advocate, I'm expecting something afterwards.
A new car.
I spoke up in class today. Where's my present?
Karen, thank you for your comment. Rewards are just another way to force compliance. I think you're aligned with Kara on that one for sure.
And Skye, hopefully you feel good just because you did this thing that used to be hard for you. Hopefully that's the reward in itself, your own progress.
That's the thing, I didn't. Okay, whoa, that was the exact words I was looking for that weren't coming out of my mouth from my brain, because I didn't want it to like take away the feeling of validation and acceptance for doing something on that, because then it just gets like shoved to the bottom because the reward is now on top of it. And it's like, well, I'm only doing this to get something out of it. Like, I'm only doing this to get that candy out of this from my teacher. I'm not doing this because I want to make myself feel good. It's because I want the candy. Mm-hmm. So it kind of like cuts out the original intention of the IPP to begin with.
Mm-hmm.
See, I'm lucky because I teach performing arts, teach musical theater and choir. The students, the thought of giving a drama kid a reward is like just so foreign to me from a teaching perspective, because it's all about, how does this make you feel? Doesn't this make you feel better? If it doesn't make you feel better, how can we make it make you feel better? Not in, you know, I'll give you a mark or you can get the lead role in the play. That's not the point. It's like, what are you getting from this?
And I just had so many students who, like, I think one of the stories in my book was a student who said, he's now in grade 6 and he still hates the color red because every day in kindergarten, he came home with the red frowny face and he never knew what he needed to do to get the green smiley face sticker. And so often rewards just sort of replicate those kinds of dynamics. So there's the kids who always get the reward, the kids who never get the reward, and the kids who are sometimes in the middle and anxious about getting the reward, right? And that's sort of the pitfalls of reward systems.
Kara, you mentioned it, so now I'm going to say it. For those of you who are teachers, who are also parents, Kara has written an incredible book called The Autism Lens. I highly recommend you check it out. It is an invaluable resource in my house, and I've recommended it to every teacher that I know. But we will share that information in the email tomorrow. But you brought it up, so I was allowed to say that. Bruce, sorry, I cut you off.
Oh, no, I was just going to say, just an emphasis. It's like the rewards are kind of silly things in teaching. Positive reinforcement is not. Positive reinforcement is the most important thing.
Right. Are there any other questions? Because I'm noticing now that it's 9:20. I feel like we could talk about this for another 3 hours, but I think some of us have to go to bed and move on. But are there any other questions at this point? And if not, again, I'm going to share contact information tomorrow via email. The recording of this event will be up on our YouTube channel in the next couple of days when I have a chance to just make sure it's all okay to post. But if there's any other questions right now, we'll grab them. If not, we will say good night. And again, you're welcome to email us info@autismcanada.org. Thank you to everyone for being here. This was a great session. Holy smokes. No shortage of questions, comments, and information. Again, there are lots of people at the other end of the line if you need help. We are here for you, and we appreciate you all coming. We especially appreciate having the insight of Skye. We haven't had her for the last couple of sessions, and might have been helpful there as well, but thank you for joining us. It was lovely to see your face and great to have your perspective. Just a reminder for everyone that our Awesome Conference is coming up in a couple of weeks. It is an incredible day of presentations by individuals on the spectrum. Bruce is one of our presenters this year. You can get more information about it on our website, but if you would like to join us, we'd love to have you. We've got some great sessions for that event as well. So thank you everyone for being here, and that will be it for tonight.
Thanks.
Bye. Thanks.
Thank you.